Welcome back to News Channel 7 Plus today. As we get ready for America's 250th birthday, we can't forget to celebrate the founding of Bay County. So we're joined here today with Kenny Redd from the Historical Society of Bay County to learn more about its history.
Yes, thanks for having me. I always enjoy coming at Channel 7. You're so very welcoming, and it's a pleasure to chat with you. Today I would like to talk about two very prominent individuals that lived, well, at least for a brief period, on St. Andrew Bay, or had a very strong interest in St. Andrew Bay. Yeah. The two people are Carolyn Lee Hentz and Minor Cooper Keith. Carolyn Lee Hentz is quite famous. She's an author that wrote plays and novels back before the Civil War. She was born in Lancaster, Massachusetts in the year 1800. Her family was very prominent in the area. She can trace her lineage all the way back to the Mayflower. Wow. Her father and her brothers both were in the Continental Army. Her father was quite famous. He was a hero and somewhat of a colonel rather, and somewhat of a hero in the Revolutionary War. Wow. So she grew up in elite circumstances in Massachusetts. There she met a recent immigrant from France, Nicholas Hentz. He had gotten on the wrong side of Napoleon in France, and him and his family immigrated to the United States for their personal safety. Yeah. And he was a professional, you could say. He was an entomologist. He studied insects, and he could speak several languages. She met Nicholas around the age of 23, and they got married. And he found employment at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He was an instructor. He was the chair of their language group in Chapel Hill, and he taught French there for a couple of years. Nicholas always seemed to struggle. He had a mental condition that we would call bipolar today. So it wasn't very well understood back in the day when she married him. So he struggled quite a lot with employment. He was continuously finding positions and then shortly losing them due to his mental condition. So as a couple, they found themselves moving all throughout the South. They started off in North Carolina. They moved to Kentucky, in Covington, Kentucky. They moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. And in each town, typically, they would create a girls' school, and they were always very successful. They would, because of his reputation, he was able, Nicholas's reputation, he was able to successfully create girls' schools in each town that they would move to. Of course, there was always some incident that would cause them to have to pack up and leave again. But in Cincinnati, she joined a local literary club called the Semicolon Club. And in this club was also Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe was the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, up until that time, the most popular novel that had ever been written. And when I say the most popular, it was by far. It like sold 10 times more than the next competing novel. So she was a runaway and extreme runaway bestseller at the time. And Carolyn Lee Hentz and Harriet Beecher Stowe were acquaintances. They knew each other very well. Yeah. And they shared quite a number of similarities. They both were born and raised in New England. In the end, they both wound up retiring in Florida. Harriet Beecher Stowe also retired and moved to a remote area at Glen Cove Springs in Florida, where Carolyn Lee Hentz moved to St. Andrew Bay, or what was known as Old Town at the time. Carolyn Lee Hentz's daughter Julia that suggested that she joined them in Marianna. Her daughter had moved to Marianna, Florida. She married a doctor, John Keyes. John Keyes is quite famous himself. And after her daughter Julia moved to Marianna, Dr. Keyes and Julia invited their mom and his mother-in-law to move to Marianna. And Carolyn Lee Hentz and her husband, Nicholas, moved to Marianna in, I think, 1854. And they enjoyed that. And it was Dr. Keyes who suggested to Nicholas that he move to San Andrew Bay because he thought the salt air would improve his health. He was suffering not only from mental conditions, but she had health conditions as well by this time. And so Nicholas was living full-time on San Andrew Bay, and Carolyn would come and spend the summer. So she would come down in the spring, spend all summer, and then return back to Marianna in the fall because her sons were living in Marianna as well. So she split her time between Marianna and Old Town on St. Andrew Bay. In Old Town was a very small community at that time, so she was by far the most famous resident of Old Town. It was a 2-day trip to go from Marianna to St. Andrew Bay, and they would stop on their way at Gaynor Springs and spend the night because to travel by wagon, a horse-drawn wagon, was quite an arduous event. It was quite taxing. As a matter of fact, when on her last return back to Marianna, she asked the wagon driver to pause on the bay shore, and she wanted to glance at the bay and take a moment to rest there, because later in her journal she noted that she felt like it would be the last time that she would see the bay that she had fallen in love with. She loved St. Andrew Bay. She loved her time that she spent there. And she was very productive on St. Andrew Bay as well, writing the greater portion of her most famous novel, A Planter's Northern Bride there. Unfortunately, on her last journey back to Marianna, it was late in the year. It was approaching, it was the holiday season, as a matter of fact. It was Christmas time that she returned to Marianna, and it was a cold, wet trip back. You know how it can be during those months.
Yes.
And so she developed a severe cold when she returned to Marianna, and the cold turned into pneumonia, and then that brought about the end of her life. So she died in 1856, and but we can look back at her life and remark about the impact that she had on literature at the time. She fell out of favor among literary critics at the time because of her support for the southern states during the Civil War. Even though she was born in the North, she very much was sympathetic with the Southern society and Southern causes, and she supported the Confederate States during the Civil War, which of course meant that she supported slavery. And that was why she wrote the novel A Planter's Northern Bride. She wrote that in response to Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, where Uncle Tom's Cabin was quite critical of slavery. Carolyn Lee Hentz was supportive of it. And so for that reason, she fell out of favor. However, lately, with the advent of feminism, she's viewed somewhat more favorably. her characters, the central characters in all of her books, typically in her novels, are women, and generally they're married and head of households, and very often they become the leader of the household, and for that reason, because of her characters having such strong personalities and being able to stand on their own, they are viewed more favorably these days by people that read her books. It's a shame that her life was ended rather abruptly. She was only in her 50s when she got sick and died. But the bright spot is that she loved St. Andrew Bay dearly, and made a note of it in her journals about how she enjoyed her time on St. Andrew Bay.
Yeah.
The next individual that here locally that also fell in love with St. Andrew Bay is Minor Cooper Keith. Again, born in a northern state, born in New York City. When he was 16 years old, he became a timber surveyor. What timber surveyors did was to go out into the wilderness, which at that point in time was the Midwestern states, states like Ohio and Michigan. Mm-hmm. And they would survey timber, and then they would select the best timber near creeks and rivers, timber that could be easily sawn and then transported via rivers and creeks to sawmills. So he actually became quite wealthy as a young man, 16 years old, surveying timber. And he took his savings, which was a few $1,000s, which is quite a bit of money back in the Civil War era, yeah. And he purchased half of Galveston Island with that, which is a massive amount of land off the coast, off the Gulf Coast of Texas. Yeah. And he was very successful as that. He raised cattle and was quite successful until 1870 rather. In 1870, his uncle contacted him and said, "Would you like to join me in Costa Rica? I've been asked to build a railroad through the jungle from the Caribbean to the Pacific in Costa Rica. And your brothers, Minor Cooper Keith's brothers, had elected to join their uncle. Henry Meggs was his name. So his brothers joined their Uncle Henry, and Uncle Henry also invited Minor Cooper Keith to join them as well. So the entire Keith family was in Costa Rica constructing this railroad through the jungle. Well, their uncle was quite successful. He was the one that had created a railroad across the Andes in Peru. So I think they were thinking that building this railroad through the jungle would be fairly easy, a piece of cake, so to speak. Well, it turned out not to be that way at all. As a matter of fact, it took 20 years to build that railroad through the jungles of Costa Rica, primarily because of jungle diseases. Yeah. Over 4,000 workers died building the railroad through the jungle, so it was quite difficult. As a matter of fact, maintaining the good health among the workers was quite difficult to do. One of the tasks that a miner had been assigned was a commissary agent. It was his job to feed the workers. And while he was in New Orleans on one of his visits, as they were building the railroad, he discovered bananas in the port of New Orleans. So he thought that would be a good source of nutrition for the workers. So he took back these bananas that he found in New Orleans and planted them alongside the railroad as they constructed it in Costa Rica. Well, it turned out that bananas were in fact a good source of nutrition. So it was a good thing that he had made that decision. Well, he also realized that there was possibly a market in bananas in the United States. So he took a few bananas, ripe bananas, back to New Orleans on one of his trips, and indeed bananas were a hit. So he realized that bananas could be a source of income for him, and he began to import bananas into the port of New Orleans. Well, during this time, he became the hero of Costa Rica. Costa Rica was struggling financially as a nation, and they were about to, in fact, go bankrupt to the banks of London at the time. They were unable to pay the loans that they had taken out from banks in London. And so he was sent as an envoy to London to renegotiate their loans, and he was very successful in doing that. He came back to Costa Rica with very good loan terms for the government. So he was quite the hero. He was celebrated. For a week, they had a holiday, a week-long holiday throughout the entire nation celebrating his success. Yes, quite the hero. As a matter of fact, he was so well received, he was celebrated among the upper echelon in the government of Costa Rica. He met the daughter of the president of Costa Rica, fell in love with the daughter of President of Costa Rica, and they got married. So that is quite an amazing story that he marries the daughter of the president. All the while, they're still building the railroad, and it's taking 20 years plus to build this railroad. The same thing happens again. The government is at risk of defaulting on their loans. So Minor Cooper Keith goes back to London once again, renegotiates again a loan agreement that favors the government of Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Again, he's celebrated as the hero of Costa Rica. On this occasion, he's granted 800,000 acres of farmland alongside the railroad in Costa Rica.
Wow.
So this is his opportunity. Now he really is in a position to do something with bananas, and he plants bananas all along the railroad throughout the jungle in Costa Rica. So that is a windfall for him. He's very successful importing bananas into the port of New Orleans. The major hang-up at the time is that corruption is rife in the port of New Orleans. They realize that what he's importing is time critical, so the folks there that operating the port use that against him to force him to pay higher fees than he felt like he ordinarily should have to pay. So he began to look for an alternate port, and that's how he discovered St. Andrew Bay. So after discovering St. Andrew Bay, he actually fell in love with St. Andrew Bay. He purchased property. He purchased home property that one day he intended to build his retirement home. But not only that, he purchased many acres throughout the region and became quite active in business in the county. He purchased land tracts. He purchased the St. Andrew Bay Railroad, at least controlling interest in the St. Andrew Bay Railroad. And he became partners with local businessmen in the area. He was a founder of the Panama Country Club in Lynn Haven.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and he built two very famous upscale hotels in Lynn Haven and Panama City. In Lynn Haven, he built the Lynn Haven Hotel. As you're crossing from Southport into Lynn Haven and cross the bridge, at the foot of the bridge in Lynn Haven is where the Lynn Haven Hotel once stood back in the 1920s.
Wow.
He also built the Pines Hotel in Panama City. As you travel along Beach Drive today and you pass the fuel depot, that is where the Pines Hotel was back in the 20s as well.
Wow.
It burned down in 1933, which is a shame because it was quite a nice hotel. Not only did he build the hotels, but he promoted them as well. He advertised in northern publications, in magazines and newspapers, promoting the health benefits of staying on the bay and on St. Andrew Bay. Of course, the Northerners, even then as now, enjoy coming to Florida and spending time. Well, he's credited with kickstarting tourism in Bay County because no one had promoted tourism at that time. And so we can credit him for being the very first, the grandfather of tourism in Bay County. Very successful. One odd thing about bananas at the time is they become a social status item.
Really?
Yes, at the time bananas were extremely expensive. Today they're the least expensive fruit you can buy, but at the time they were very, very expensive. And matter of fact, only the well-to-do could actually afford to purchase bananas.
Wow.
And folks began to use them as a status symbol. They would go to photo parlors and have formal photographs taken of them standing there either holding or peeling and eating bananas. It's crazy.
Wow.
At the time, that was a craze that occurred. It was the banana phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so like today, if we wanted to indicate that we had high social status, we'd probably purchase a Mercedes. Well, back in the day, they would buy bananas. Bananas were quite the hit. Minor Cooper Keith was taken with Panama, St. Andrew Bay, intended to make it his retirement home. But his wife, being the daughter of the president of Costa Rica, was accustomed to a little bit higher standards than what she found here in Bay County, in Panama City. So it was her desire not to retire among fishermen and foresters. So they retired instead in Long Island in New York. And Minor Cooper Keith died in 1929. He was the founder of United Fruit Company, which we know as Chiquita today. So when you eat a Chiquita banana, you have a direct connection to Minor Cooper Keith. Of course, the United Fruit Company later, particularly in the 40s and 50s, they became embroiled in Central American politics. As a matter of fact, that's where the term Banana Republic came from, was from the United Fruit becoming engaged in their politics.
Oh, wow.
And their reputation suffered because of that.
Yeah.
But he died well before that era. He was not involved in that. As a matter of fact, he was the hero of Costa Rica and many other Latin American countries where he had banana plantations. They were very eager to have Mr. Keith raise and export bananas out of their country because it was injected cash into their economies.
Yeah.
So he was held in high respect at that point in time, and he deserves a lot of credit today for being on the cutting edge of developing tourism in our area. We can point back to him being the very first to do it. Of course, you know, tourism is our primary component of our economy today. So we can thank Minor Cooper Keith for kickstarting that industry.
Wow, that is incredible. Kenny, it is such a pleasure always getting to learn so much from you, and I'm always so impressed by how much you can hold all that information in your head. But it's been an amazing morning with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Please have me again.
Of course, anytime. Thanks so much for joining us as well. When we come back, we'll check in with Sean Brown.